Hello guys, how are we doing? Welcome back to the channel. Season 4 Reloaded came with the addition of Fringe into the Black Ops 6 ranked play map pool, and today's video is going to be teaching you the spawns. Hopefully following today's video you come out with a little bit more spawn knowledge, which will hopefully enable you to read spawns, manipulate and control spawns, therefore win more games, win by more, win more SR, and rank up higher. If you have any questions about today's video, I know spawns can be a little bit complex. I'm going to try and simplify it as much as possible by giving you guys a bit of a summary at the end of each hard point. Leave the comments down below. I'll answer as soon as I can. But yeah, hopefully this video covers any questions you should probably have already. Now, before we get into the Fringe Hardpoint guide, I just wanted to let you know, if you want to see this and have it on your tablet, your second monitor or something, you can do so by clicking the rank play guide link down below. It looks like this. All you need to do is go down to the contents. You can see Fringe at the bottom. You can either scroll all the way down using the scroll bar or just scroll on your phone, whatever. But if you're on desktop, you can simply click it. It takes you to the Fringe callouts. It takes you to the Fringe details, and you can see everything I'm explaining here in today's video down in written form, so you can have a look, revise it before bed, whatever you want. But yeah, let me know if that's helpful, and let's crack on with the video. So as I say, I'm going to be going through every single hill at a time. So we'll start at P1, go through to P4. I'm going to give you a quick introduction of how this is going to work. So I'm going to briefly talk about what the maps mean, like what this overview means for Fringe. You've got some callouts there that you can already see, and you'd have seen. If you want to know the callouts specifically around the map, you can check out the video that's uploaded around a similar time to this one today. But yeah, we're going to be going through all the technical bits, and then at the very end of each hardpoint, we're going to give a little bit of a summary, which will hopefully make a lot of sense. So if you don't want to know all the technicalities and all the details, which I feel like you probably do need if you want to be really excellent at spawn control, you can just skip to the end of each hard point, or P is they're going to be listed out, and you can just get a little bit of a summary there. So kicking off at P1, for those of you who are new to my spawn guides, I've got one of these for every single map. The rings replicate or indicate the spawn points. You've got the two hardpoint locations, the more bright and vivid one being the current hill, the more dim one being the next. So as you can see, P1 is really bright here because that's the hill we're focusing on, and then you've got relevant callouts that are relevant to this hill and the spawns we're going to be discussing today. So P1, the two main spawn areas are these blue ones and the pink. They're the two default ones. Neither side is better. A completely personal preference which side you want to control. The pink spawns, I would say, probably slightly better because of the rotation to P2 has potential is slightly greater, but for P1 itself doesn't really matter. Now these spawns are utilized as long as no one on the other team pushes past this P1 halfway line. So if you imagine a halfway line going vertically through P1, as long as no one on the other team pushes over that halfway line, you're going to continue to utilize these pink spawns, okay? Now, you'll spawn at the opposite side of your spawn to wherever the furthest enemy player is pushed up. For example, let's say this is your team, and because the furthest player pushed up is on the left-hand side of the map, it'll actually open up this blue spawn, this B-bomb spawn for the enemy team to spawn. Take it slightly differently, where the furthest player on your team is pushed up is actually on the right-hand side of the map. The enemy team will actually spawn red truck because it's the opposite side to where your further player is pushed up. Now, in order to stop the enemies spawning at these primary spawns, someone on your team has to push through that halfway line. Okay, so you can see here, you can either push through P1 itself. So to block blue, you can be in this area. To block blue, you can be pushed through the halfway line, and so maybe be in the bar, in the brick building, or push their side train, and that'll block the blue spawns. And that's the same on the other side. So if you're spawning on this left-hand side here, and you want to stop the enemies from spawning at these closer spawns, and you want to open up these alternatives, which probably won't want to do because it's actually closer, you want to push through P1. So you want to be either like their side L, their side train, or their side towards A-bomb, or actually towards P2. That'll actually switch it from, that'll block these blue and pink spawns and open up these alternative spawns you can see here, the red and the yellow ones. When these second spawns are activated, so when somebody is pushed through P1's halfway line either side, the next person to spawn in will spawn in at the furthest available spawn away from their enemy. What does that mean? In this example, you can see here, if your team is situated like this, because one player is pushed past the halfway line, and it's this player here, and the furthest secondary spawn is this one, that's where the enemies will spawn. You know, they can't spawn here or here because of these two players, and they're not likely to spawn here because of this player's location. So the enemies are going to spawn towards the bridge. Now, if we look at that slightly differently, let's say that player, instead of being towards this upside, actually takes a little bit of a stance towards the barn, and the player who's back here on your team is actually towards tin. Just because this player's all the way back here blocking doesn't mean that's where the enemies can't spawn this side. Because this player's, one, pushed through P1, and two, is closer to these two alternative spawns than anyone else on your team is to this globe spawn, the enemies are going to spawn behind your globe. So it's very important that you be aware that as soon as your team pushes through this P1 line, you've got to look for the four corners of the map and say, okay, which one is more open? And that's where the enemy is going to spawn. So let's take some scenarios here. Let's say you've spawned somewhere. What does that mean? So spawning at any of the primary spawns doesn't give you much information, because even a meter of difference between the enemy's team can swing one side or the other. So if you spawn at any of these pink or blue spawns, don't read too much into it. It doesn't mean much, and you shouldn't make decisions based on that knowledge. All it really tells you, to be honest, is that the enemy is heavily the other side of P1 and their side of the P1 halfway line. Now, if you spawn at any of the secondary spawns, this means the enemy is through the halfway line, through P1 potentially, and this is the furthest spawn away from an enemy player. For example, if you spawn back B-bomb, all the way back here, means the enemy is slightly pushed towards fences, but they're closer to the bridge. So they're pushed towards, not fence, sorry, they're pushed towards the bridge hand side, and they're slightly pushed towards P1, so that's why you spawn there. Now, strategically, you need to try and spawn the enemy at a particular secondary spawn. So you want to try and figure out with your team, what one's preferable. Now, for me, because of where P2 is situated, I would love to have the enemy spawn all the way over here, because it's quite a journey. It's far from P1, first of all, and it's also really far from P2, which makes the rotation a lot more difficult than it would be if they were spawning anywhere else. So in order to obtain that spawn, you can have a setup like we've just shown in the previous slides, but essentially you want control of grannies. If you sit grannies, you want someone in between these two yellow spawns, ideally blocking them, and then you want to make sure that nobody is, and then you basically want it set up so that your teammates are closer to this, and this than they are to here. So you could have someone maybe pushed up in the bar, maybe enemy teammate here, someone in grannies, someone in a hill, and that would basically mean that you've got a triangular defense, meaning that this is where the enemy is going to spawn. And that's probably how I'd suggest doing it. So, in summary, you spawn either side of P1. If you want them to spawn further, you push through P1. But as soon as someone oversteps that P1 halfway line, the game will look to spawn the enemies at the furthest possible away from your teammates in these four corners. P2, a little bit more simple. P1s are always difficult because it's middle of the map and it can be a little bit confusing. The main two spawns here, again, are pink and blue, so silos and then towards the red truck caution area, and they're likely to continue at these two spawns if both teams just bang out P2. If both teams just spawn in, run P2, spawn in, run P2, these are likely just to be the spawns that are going to be used. The alternative spawns, these three here, the yellow, teal, and red ones, sorry, these are used when players start taking less standard routes and even start to push through the hill a little. In this setup, because a player has pushed towards the B-bomb spawn here, you can see this player here, the game determines this spawn and the blue spawn to be unsafe. These two spawns unsafe. So the game looks to spawn either the enemy bridge or grass. Thanks to someone recently spawning silos and running just about to run through tin, the bridge spawns are deemed the safer spawns and the enemies spawn there, which is why it's glowing, all right? So in this sort of setup, because, you know, bridge is the furthest spawn away from one of your teammates, this is where the enemies are going to spawn. However, in this example, due to having a player between the red truck and the bar, sort of in this zone, yellow and blue spawns are blocked. The game will now look to spawn the enemy's B-bomb or grass. But thanks to there also being a player in grannies, the game's not going to spawn them grass or solos, which therefore allocates them the B-bomb spawn all the way over here. However, if you're in this setup, this exact same setup, but the player in grannies is actually through tin and trying to support P2, the game spawns them grass. So you actively need, if you want to set up like this where they spawn all the way back here, which is probably what I'd advise, you want it so that someone's blocking these two spawns and they can be doing that through grannies. So you want to try and avoid anyone pushing all the way through the bar if you don't have someone blocked, because they're going to flip. And if they flip, they're close to P3, which is the next hill. Now let's take some scenarios here. If you spawn blue or pink, it's just a regular spawn, and you're unlikely to have any unusual pressure from enemy team at the time of your spawn, at least. Obviously, don't forget, your spawn only tells you where enemies are at that exact moment of your spawn. Okay, if they move from them, they move from them. They can do what they want, but your spawn only tells you where enemies are at that very precise point. Okay. Now, if you spawn a bridge, it means the enemy has control of silos and tin, and are likely pushed up through P1, sort of in this area. If you spawn B-bomb, means the enemy has pushed through P2, has some control of P3, and maybe even just come off the silo spawn. Now, if you spawn grass, means the enemy has pushed through P2 and does not have control of P3 area, and they're likely all just push through P2. Okay, so that's probably why you then spawned grass. So strategically, if you want the most effective setup, you need to have a player on the red truck around here, 2 players in the sort of granny area around this zone here, and a player getting a hill time. That will spawn the enemy's B-bomb, which is sort of akin to what we saw a couple of slides ago, and then have to run from B-bomb to P2, and therefore they've got to cross this street, and therefore they've got to come across the 2 lines of sights of people in grannies and the player in red truck. So they're going to run into this firing line here of 3 players. Now, be careful, because when it comes to the end of P2, players spawning here are likely to rotate through train to get to P3. So therefore, you want someone who's in grannies to pick up that check. Okay, and therefore you've got this lane covered and this lane covered and this lane covered, because you've already got people on the P2 and the player on red truck. Now, P3 is probably the most simple spawn to remember, and it's located in grannies. Now, primary spawn is pink, this one here back at the grass train near silos, and this is a spawn you're likely to get if your team has control of P3. Now, being on P3 itself blocks pink and unlocks yellow, which is also very easily blockable by being anywhere outside of P3. So you can see if you're anywhere, if you're on P3, the enemy can't spawn here. But if you then push out towards any sort of the backside, because you can see the spawn and because you're near the spawn, it actually blocks both of these spawns. So it's very easy, and very commonly, both of these spawns are blocked by both teams, especially when it's scrappy around P3. Now, the secondary spawn will be blue, this one down here. So when these spawns are blocked, this is the next one that opens up. This one that's between sort of the red truck and alley, or sometimes in alley. That's just that general area. And if blue, pink, and yellow are blocked, then the teal spawns opens up near crash. Okay? So if these are blocked and this is blocked, this is then the next one. Okay, so that's how it goes. It goes pink spawn. Is it blocked? Yes. Spawn yellow. Are they both blocked? Yes, they spawn blue. Are all 3 blocked? They spawn teal. Now, if the game allocates you the blue spawn, now you're probably wondering what this orange one is. Now, if the game thinks that this is the best spawn for you to have, but someone on the enemy team is pushed through middle slightly, the game's then going to push you a little bit further back, so you're a little bit more safe into that orange spawn, and that's where you utilize that orange spawn. For example, if your team is coming from P2, which was here, if we don't remember, and the enemies have rotated to P3, the spawn the game will use is the exact point at this exact very moment of this situation is yellow, because you don't have pressure through the hill yet. They're not going to spawn pink because you've got pressure on P3 itself. They're actually going to spawn grass because you're blocking pink and you don't have anyone push through the hill. Let's say this player here actually takes a little bit of a route around this right-hand side here. Because you've got pressure on P3 and players on your team has pushed through P3 itself, or at least they're in the back of the spawn area, that means both pink and yellow are now blocked by these players here. Now, the game will therefore look to spawn them blue. As we said, that's the next spawn. But as you'll probably notice, you've got a player on your team who's alley. So the game's going to go, crap, they can't spawn here, they can't spawn in the back. They therefore spawn all the way over here. So in this sort of situation, this is where the enemies will spawn, towards the crash site, towards like B-bomb, whatever you want to call it, back trains. That's where they're going to be coming from. Now, let's say that player who was P2 moves all the way through and actually managed to get into tin. Let's say nothing else has changed. Instead of the enemies spawning crash, the game actually utilizes the second spawn, or the third spawn, I guess you could say, which is alley. That is, don't forget, the default spawn, the main spawn the game is going to use once pink and yellow are both blocked, which they are by these teams. As soon as this player enters tin, that's when this spawn opens up, in a really easy way to remember it. If they're in P2, that's still blocked. They have to get into this tin area for this to open up again. Now, if a player on pickup decides to move to P1, so it's that exact same situation, but the player who was middle here actually decides to move slightly further up, as we've already said, the game determines this alley spawn here, this red truck spawn, this blue spawn, a little bit unsafe. So it spawns on bridge. Okay, and that's a really nice setup, actually. If you have not quite this setup, but that's a real nice way to spawn the enemies at the furthest possible point and away from the new objective, is to have someone push through middle, block these 2 spawns, and get hill time. That's sort of what you want to go for. That's the strategy I would use on this P3. So let's take some scenarios. Let's put yourself in a position where you're actually playing and you spawn somewhere. What does it mean? If you spawn pink, it means your team likely has control of P3, and it's just a safe spawn. It's the first spawn you're going to get. Now, if you spawn yellow, it means your team has likely control of P3 area, but the enemies are starting to put pressure through the objective or on the objective itself. Now, if you spawn blue, this alley spawn down here, the enemy's got control of P3. The whole P3 area, okay? Whether you're on the hill as well, it doesn't matter. If the enemies have got control of the P3 area, you're going to spawn alley. If you spawn teal, it means the enemy's got control of P3 area, but they're also around this P2 zone, or they've just spawned alley themselves. So the game's gone, okay, you're going to spawn teal as a result. Now, if you happen to spawn orange, unlucky, they've got all the map control they ever need. No, seriously, if they spawn orange, all it simply means is the enemy's got good control of P3, the area around P3 as well, but they're likely to have someone maybe running up middle or maybe rotating to P4. Okay, so if you spawn orange and it's coming to the end of P3, you can almost guarantee enemies are already starting to set up a P4. Okay. Talking to P4, let's have a look. So the main 2 spawns here, shock, are pink and blue, which are globe grass area as well as this back crash site. Okay. Sometimes it can be a little bit closer, sometimes it can be a little bit further, but just general, that's the area they'll be. Now, you can block blue by being on or pushed through P4. So being on P4 itself will block this blue spawn. And then if that happens, that teal becomes the alternative spawn for the blue one. Now, if you have people around a global grass, the enemies will spawn teal if that's happened. And the yellow spawns are utilized more often when the other team have barn or front barn control, and they have someone putting pressure through this side of P4. So the game's just going to say, okay, because there's players barn, this and this spawn are blocked, but also because there's players push this side of P4, they can't spawn them grass, they're actually going to spawn them a little bit safer over here towards the yellow circle. Now, in this situation, because 3 members of your team are on P4, and the 4th is just coming off of a teal spawn, the game will spawn the enemy yellow. Now, it won't spawn them pink because of the location of this player here, or maybe this player here, because they're quite close to this pink spawn. It's going to spawn them here, okay? Because it's safer to do so. And they're not spawning in blue because you've got players on P4, yeah? Now, just because you have players on P4, that doesn't always mean the enemies won't spawn blue. If you have a member of the team literally in the pink and yellow zone, look like we've got here, this red arrow is literally just come off yellow spawn, they're in this area, and you've got a player who's just come off this caution spawn or this teal spawn, the game's going to spawn them at the blue because it's maybe slightly deeper, because it's still, if you're going to say what's the safest spawn point for the enemy to spawn, it's going to be this one, isn't it? It can't be these 2 because of this player, and it can't be here because of this player, so it's going to be that one. And so you've got to be very careful, you've got to be very aware of where your teammates are. However, if this player teal actually is not there and they're actually on the time as well, the game's then going to go, okay, actually, the safest place to spawn them is caution, or this teal zone here. And that's because there's, no one's near it. You've got players here who are blocking blue. You've got a player back here who's blocking both these spawns. So that's just the spawn it's going to pick. So let's take some scenarios here. If you spawn blue or pink, it simply means the enemy have control of the other side of the map and they haven't pushed through P4 itself yet. If you spawn yellow, it means the enemy has control of barn or barn area and of slight presence globe side of P4, around where my cursor is. If you spawn teal, this indicates the enemy has granny spawn control around here and have pushed up crash site of P4 or in P4 itself. So strategically, I prefer to have granny spawners here because you can lock the enemies into the teal spawns, which means they've got to run across this open street, and it means you can cut them off. To do this, you probably want someone dedicated to sitting in grannies, who therefore is blocking both of these spawns, and they can watch the player with this cross. Really, they can watch the P1 cross here. You then want one player push through P4, one player get in time, and then the lone player that leaves one of the player, they can sort of help out. They can fill the gap. If someone dies, let's say the player on time dies or whatever, they can then get on time. But if they're not, let's say they get a clean 4 wipe, you've got a player grannies, you've got a player push through a little bit, you've got a player on time, they can sit in small room. They can just be somewhere between teal and thingy and P4 itself. But they need to be very careful in the setup. They don't just push teal spawns, because it's going to lead to unpredictability. So you want to make sure that, yes, in that setup where you've got someone push through P4, you've got someone on P4, someone on grannies, that the 4th player remaining isn't just aping this teal spawn, because it's going to make it unpredictable. So they want to leave it open a little bit. So whether they sit P1 a little bit deep, whether they sit in fences or B-bomb, helping out this player this side of near the crash site, that's something you're going to want to try and achieve. And that's that. I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. I hope you found it useful. If you have any questions, I know it can be a little bit technical, let me know down below, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao for now.